They showed up on Christmas Eve with a crowbar, a locksmith, and a forged document with my signature on it. My own family. And if I hadn't been ready for them, they would have taken everything. My name is Nora Ellison. I'm 34. And for most of my life, December 25th meant the same thing: a missing seat at the table, a gift bought in a hurry if there was one at all, and a polite excuse about how everyone assumed I was busy or sleeping or simply didn't need to be there. Last Christmas was the final time. I drove 5 hours through freezing rain with a trunk full of gifts, only to find the house glowing with warmth and music that had no space left for me. When the door opened, the look on my mother's face wasn't relief. It was irritation. I stood there in the cold holding bags in both hands, and I made a decision so quiet nobody noticed. New number. Locked accounts. Mail routed through a private box 2 towns over. No social media. No digital fingerprints. No trail leading back to wherever I was going next. And where I was going was a manor. Blackthorn Manor sat on a hill outside a small Vermont town called Evergreen Hollow. Old stone walls. Iron gates. Enough land around it to make the rest of the world feel distant. Most buyers would have seen a burden, too severe, too remote, too wrapped in historical preservation red tape. I saw armor. I bought it through a trust structure specifically because the paperwork was hard to follow. The title didn't sit in my name the way a normal deed would. It sat inside a legal arrangement too complicated for careless people to exploit and too strong for liars to get around. I didn't buy it to feel rich. I bought it to feel unreachable. By early December, the manor was mine to live in. I drove up 3 days before Christmas with groceries, candles, good wine, and no plans that involved performing gratitude for people who forgot I existed 10 months out of every year. I stood in the front hall that first night and listened to the silence settle over the house like it had been waiting for me. No one interrupting. No one asking what I'd brought. No one telling me to be patient, to be gracious, to be the bigger person, as if absorbing neglect had always been some moral test I was supposed to pass with a smile. I lit the library fireplace. Opened a bottle of Cabernet. Sat in a leather chair and watched the flames. And then I laughed out loud in an empty room. Because for the first time in my adult life, I felt safe. I should have known peace that clean wouldn't go unchallenged. I heard the engines before I saw the cars. That road leads almost nowhere. Nobody drives up there by accident, especially not in late afternoon with snow coming down and the temperature dropping fast. I moved to the front window and kept the lights off. 2 dark SUVs rolled into view. Behind them, a locksmith van. My first feeling wasn't fear. It was insult. They hadn't called. They hadn't written. They hadn't come to apologize for years of leaving me out in the cold, literally and otherwise. They brought tools. My mother stepped out first in a cream wool coat, looking like she'd dressed for a holiday photo shoot. My father Richard came behind her wearing that tired, reasonable expression he used whenever he needed strangers to believe he was the adult in the room. My brother Logan climbed out of the second SUV already talking into his phone, and then he started unloading flat-packed display stands and storage bins like he was arriving for a job. That detail told me everything. They weren't here to visit. They were here to install themselves. I walked down to the gate and stopped on my side of the bars. My mother smiled, that pained, delicate smile she reserved for moments she expected to win. "Nora," she said, as if this were all perfectly simple. "Open the gate, sweetheart. It's freezing." "How did you find me?" I asked. My father sighed before she could answer. He wanted to enjoy this. Logan found a tagged flooring photo online, he said. Cross-referenced the stonework with a preservation archive. You really should be more careful. So calm. As if violating my privacy was a lesson in my own failure. My mother stepped closer to the bars. We were worried about you. Spending Christmas alone in a place this big isn't healthy. Family should be together. I almost laughed at that. Family had never needed to be together when I was the one left outside. Then Logan stepped forward with a folded document pressed against the gate. Good news, he said, grinning. We solved the space problem. I looked at the paperwork. It was styled as a shared residential use agreement, guest wing access, family holiday overflow, event hosting rights, long-term occupancy protections. Language designed to sound reasonable to anyone who didn't know better. At the bottom was a version of my signature. Close enough to make my stomach drop. Not because I thought it would hold up in court, but because I immediately understood their strategy. Get inside first. Create a scene second. Force me into a slow legal mess while they turned my house into a backdrop for whatever Logan was currently trying to monetize online. This is fake, I said. My mother turned slightly toward the locksmith and touched the corner of one very dry eye. She's confused, she said softly. She's been under so much stress. We're just trying to help her. The locksmith shifted uncomfortably. My father used his low professional tone. We have a family situation. She gets overwhelmed. We're only trying to settle in quietly. Logan needs temporary space for a holiday content business he's launching. And there it was. The real motive. A holiday content business. The display stands. The bins. The lighting cases. Logan hadn't come to stay quietly in a guest room. He'd come to turn my house into a set he could monetize while my mother played gracious hostess and my father called it helping. I looked directly at Logan. Still filming now. Are you trying to run events out of my home? He smirked. It's not your home like that, Nora. That sentence. I never forgot it. Not your home like that. Because underneath every lie my family ever told, the belief was always the same, nothing that belonged to me really counted as mine if they decided they wanted it. Then the locksmith stepped forward with his drill. That casually. That entitled. They didn't even pretend long. They expected me to panic. To start shouting. To become the unstable, isolated woman my mother had already described to everyone who would listen before she ever drove up that hill. Instead, I took out my phone and started recording. My mother's smile faltered for the first time. What are you doing, Nora? I held the camera steady on the drill, on the van logo, on Logan's face, on my father holding forged paperwork like it was already enough. Building a timeline, I said. And I watched all three of them realize, in the same moment, that I was no longer the daughter who would stand there begging to be let in. The deputy arrived just as the locksmith put the drill to the gate control box. I had called the moment the tool came out. Deputy Mason Cole was young, cold, and already irritated before he stepped out of his cruiser. He looked from me to the SUVs to the forged document in my father's hand, and I could see him deciding almost in real time how much effort he wanted to spend on what he assumed was a wealthy family argument. My mother moved first. She always moved first. She approached him with the perfect amount of trembling in her voice. Deputy, thank God. Our daughter has shut herself away and she isn't well. We've been trying to reach her for weeks. My father handed over the paperwork with a weary expression designed to imply he'd done everything right and I'd forced this unpleasant scene. Logan stood in the background and rolled his eyes like I was making everyone's lives difficult again. I stayed exactly where I was. Phone still recording at my side. I said my name clearly. I said I was the lawful resident. I said they had no permission to enter. I said the signature was forged. The deputy glanced at the papers, glanced at me, and then made the mistake too many people had made before him. He listened to the calmer liar. My mother lowered her voice and said words I had heard variations of my entire life. She gets like this when she feels rejected. She thinks everything is an attack. Rejected. As if neglect were an emotion I had invented instead of a pattern she had built for 34 years. The deputy rubbed his jaw and looked at me the way people look at women who are inconvenient but articulate. Ma'am, if there's a dispute over validity, this may be a civil matter. Civil, as if a forged agreement, a drill, and a planned occupation were just a misunderstanding with good winter coats. My father saw the opening immediately. We're not trying to remove her. We're trying to support family use of the property. Logan needs temporary space for a seasonal launch. Nora had agreed before she started pulling away again. I called my attorney. Elena Vargas picked up on the second ring. I gave her the facts fast. Forged occupancy agreement. Attempted forced entry. Possible utility fraud. Preservation District property. Active police presence. Elena didn't waste a single second. Don't let them bait you into a screaming match. Keep recording. Ask the deputy to verify title ownership, not just residency paperwork. And if Logan is using the property for commercial activity, he's about to bury himself. I looked at my family at the bins, the fake concern, the performance of worried relatives trying to reach their troubled daughter. And for the first time that afternoon, I felt something steadier than anger. I felt structure. They had shown up believing I was alone. What they had actually walked into was a system of evidence, zoning law, and title documentation that none of them understood. My mother noticed my expression change. I think that was the exact moment she realized her usual weapon, my silence, wasn't going to work anymore. Elena called the deputy directly. Then she emailed certified title documents to his department while I stood in the cold watching my family perform concern beside a locksmith van. 10 minutes later, the mood changed. Not all at once. Slowly. Like ice cracking under too much weight. The deputy came back with a new stiffness in his posture and asked my father for the agreement again. Then he asked one question my father had clearly never prepared for. If your daughter signed this as owner, why is title held by the Blackthorn Heritage Residential Trust? My father blinked. Logan stopped moving. My mother lost her expression for a full second before she put it back on. Ms. Ellison is the resident beneficiary and trustee occupant, the deputy continued. She's not individually titled the way this document claims. That means your agreement has a serious validity problem before we even get to the alleged signature. Elena joined by speakerphone, and listening to her dismantle them was almost luxurious. She explained that no one had authority to create private occupancy rights against the trust the way the document attempted. She explained that any planned commercial use in a preservation district without board approval would trigger historic violations. She explained that if Logan had already initiated utilities or seasonal business services using my personal information, the matter had gone well beyond a holiday misunderstanding. My mother tried to interrupt with something about family generosity. Elena cut straight through it. Concern, she said, does not arrive with a drill. For a moment, nobody spoke. The deputy told them to leave the premises and stop unloading property. Logan argued first. Naturally. He called it harassment, said I had promised space, said I was sabotaging his launch. My father tried the respectable man routine one last time. Surely this can be resolved privately. But there was nothing private left. My phone had all of it. The deputy had all of it. Elena had all of it. My mother stepped forward and hissed my name in a voice too low for the deputy but not too low for me. You're humiliating us. That word almost made me laugh. As if humiliation had only just arrived in our family. As if it hadn't been sitting quietly next to me at every Christmas dinner since I was a child. They started packing up. Not like people who accepted defeat. Like people storing rage for later. Logan shoved bins back into the SUV hard enough to crack one. My father folded the forged paperwork with trembling hands and kept glancing at me like he was trying to memorize the version of me who had become dangerous. My mother said nothing else in front of the deputy. Which was how I knew she was already writing the next version of the story. I thought I had won cleanly that afternoon. I was wrong. Inside, I checked my camera feed. Static on the front angle. Then the side entrance went dark too. Logan had done something at the cable junction on his way out. He hadn't cut the power. He'd done something more intentional. He'd blinded the two cameras that would matter most if they came back after dark. 20 minutes later, my phone rang from the utility company, asking me to confirm a service update request I had never made. Logan had already tried to move part of the account structure. Social security fragments. Old addresses. Security prompts. My skin went cold in a way the winter air couldn't. That night, I sat at the library desk under lamplight and built the file that would later ruin them. Froze my credit. Documented the utility attempt. Sent Elena every screenshot. Filed an identity theft report. Wrote out the timeline by hand because some things are easier to trust when you can see them in ink. And sometime after midnight, while the fire burned low and the old house settled around me, I understood something simple and ugly. They hadn't come because they were worried about me. They had come because I had finally built something outside their control. And the only way they could live with that was to take it. That kind of desperation doesn't leave quietly. It comes back. By morning, my mother had done exactly what I knew she would. She went public first. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years sent me a screenshot before breakfast. My mother had posted on Facebook that she and my father had driven all the way to Vermont to check on their isolated daughter, only to find me confused, aggressive, and hiding alone in a dark historic home after weeks of concerning behavior. The comments poured in. Praying for your family. She always seemed troubled. Some children don't understand sacrifice. I read every single line. Then I screenshotted all of it and saved it into a folder labeled, defamation. That was the difference between the old me and the woman sitting in Blackthorn Manor now. I no longer argued with lies in the moment. I archived them. Around 10 that morning, Logan tried again through a different angle. He submitted a vendor inquiry for a seasonal event permit using my address and a slightly altered version of my name, probably hoping to establish a paper trail suggesting operations had already begun. That was when the full shape of their plan locked into place. Logan was drowning financially and needed a prestigious venue fast. My mother wanted the social image of a curated family Christmas with herself as the face of warmth and tradition. My father wanted the whole thing framed as a cooperative family arrangement so no one would ask where the money came from or why the house was being used at all. They weren't trying to take shelter. They were trying to take narrative space and legitimacy in one move. Elena called just before noon. If they come back and attempt staged entry again, especially with commercial materials or false authority, we can tighten this into a criminal and civil package. June Mercer from the local paper returned my email. She was careful, not dramatic. She said the screenshots, the forged agreement, the utility attempt, and the preservation issues made this more than family gossip, if I could prove intent and repeat conduct. I told her I thought I could. Then I made the decision that changed the ending. I stopped thinking like a daughter defending her peace. I started thinking like someone setting conditions. Through Harold Whitmore at the local Heritage Society, I arranged a small Christmas Eve open house under the Trust's permitted residential heritage hospitality guidelines, boring enough on paper to sound harmless, powerful enough in practice to place credible witnesses inside my home. No public announcement. No social media blast. Just a handful of invited locals, a reporter, my attorney on standby, a retired locksmith named Caleb Dunn who could document exactly what kind of forced access had been attempted the day before, and Officer Reed Porter, working a private security detail arranged through Elena's network, with a deputy close enough to move the moment entry became illegal. The point wasn't a party. The point was witnesses my family couldn't outtalk. By late afternoon on Christmas Eve, the house looked dark from the road. On purpose. Curtains drawn. Exterior lights off. No sign of life from the outside. Inside was different. Lamps burned low in the library and dining room. Harold and 2 preservation board members sat with mulled wine, talking about plaster restoration in voices so calm it felt surreal. June sat near the front hall where she could see and hear everything without becoming the center of it. Caleb stood by the back corridor window with the posture of a man already furious at whatever fool thought old houses were easy to breach. I stood in the foyer in a black dress I had chosen for one reason. I wanted to look like someone who belonged in her own house. When 7 o'clock came and went, I almost wondered if they'd finally found caution. Then at 7:14, the sensor on the outer drive pinged my phone. Headlights off. Slow movement. A rental truck behind the second SUV. Not subtle anymore. Not even pretending. My family had forgotten me every Christmas until I bought a manor. Now they were back on Christmas Eve with transport, tools, and enough nerve to believe the dark house ahead of them was empty. They were about to learn the difference between empty and waiting. I watched from the front window as they pulled up without headlights. That one detail, no headlights, told me everything I needed to know about how innocent they believed they were. Logan jumped out first with a crowbar in his hand and the cornered, manic energy of someone who had run out of softer options. My father followed carrying a thick folder, another performance. My mother stepped out last, dark coat, perfect hair, makeup flawless, because even now, even at the edge of a crime, she wanted to look good doing it. There was a second locksmith too. Young. Nervous. Already realizing this family's emergency might actually be a felony. Nobody inside moved toward the door. That was the beauty of it. We let them prove intent without interruption. Through the old stone and wood, we heard everything. Logan saying, "Just break the side glass if the lock fights you." My father telling the locksmith they had power of attorney and a right to intervene. My mother's voice, raised just enough to carry, soft enough to sound heartbroken if anyone happened to be listening, "Nora, sweetheart, open the door. We're here because we love you." There was no love in the crowbar that hit my front lock seconds later. The first strike echoed through the foyer so sharply that the preservation board members in the dining room went still. The second blow splintered the frame. Then the drill. Then the prying. Then my father barking instructions like a man who had spent his whole life expecting obedience from the universe. And then the old door gave with a crack that sounded less like wood breaking than history finally running out of patience. Logan stumbled in first. Breathing hard. Crowbar still in his fist. Triumph on his face. And then the lights came up. Not every lamp. Just enough. Enough to catch them in the foyer with a ruined lock, a broken frame, and tools in their hands. Enough for them to see me standing at the foot of the staircase. Enough for them to see June Mercer lifting her phone to record. Enough for them to see Harold Whitmore and the Preservation Board members in the dining room doorway, staring like they had just watched someone put a crowbar through a church altar. Enough for Caleb Dunn to step forward and say, with complete and quiet disgust, "That is forced entry." Enough for them to see Officer Reed Porter emerge from the hallway. And the deputy right behind him. Flashlights hit their faces hard and fast. Hands where I can see them. Now. Logan froze first. My father didn't. He tried one last pivot, waving the folder, talking too fast, voice climbing toward authority it no longer had. We have documentation. She is unstable. She has been isolating herself. We are family. Officer Porter didn't even glance at the folder. Family does not break into a protected residence with burglary tools. Logan lowered the crowbar slowly, like he had only just remembered that metal had weight. My mother stared at me with a hatred so pure it almost looked clean. You set us up, she whispered. I looked at the woman who had forgotten me at every Christmas table for 34 years and felt nothing she had planned for me to feel. No, I said. I documented you. Elena stepped forward and took the folder from my father's hand. She scanned it for about 4 seconds. Fake emergency authority. Invalid on its face. Wrong execution standard, wrong witness structure, wrong property relationship. She looked up at my father with the expression of someone who has seen very bad paperwork before. You committed a felony with a document you downloaded from the internet. June almost smiled at that. But she didn't stop recording. My mother tried one more angle. She began to cry. Loudly, beautifully, with full technique, the same way she always had when she needed strangers to see pain instead of strategy. June had the Facebook post that called me confused and troubled. Elena had the forged agreement. I had the utility fraud trail. Caleb had the documented timeline of the first visit. Harold had seen the commercial bins on day one and knew exactly what heritage violations Logan had planned. My father tried to reframe reality one last time. This has gone too far. Nora, tell them we only came to talk. I looked at him. I thought of every Christmas dinner where I had felt smaller than the empty space beside me. Every gift nobody remembered to buy. Every door that opened to surprise instead of welcome. Every year I drove home alone wondering what it was about me that made family feel optional. People who come to talk, I said, don't bring crowbars. Officer Porter moved in on Logan first. Logan panicked exactly when it mattered most. He turned like he was going to bolt for the open door. The deputy caught him before he made it 2 steps. The crowbar hit the marble floor. The sound was final in a way that made my mother actually gasp. Handcuffs closed around Logan's wrists. My father protested once, then protested harder when Officer Porter told him to turn around too. Conspiracy. Trespass. Forced entry. Forged instruments. Attempted fraudulent occupation. He listed the charges in that flat, patient law enforcement voice that strips a person of every story they've ever told about themselves. My father looked stunned. Like consequences had always happened to other men. My mother stood alone in the center of the ruined foyer. Not yet cuffed. Staring at the broken door, the witnesses, me. She had one move left. Cruelty had always been her last language and her most fluent one. "After everything I did for you," she said, voice dropping to that familiar sharp whisper, "this is how you repay me." I took one step closer. The house was warm at my back. Snow was blowing in through the broken door around us. "Everything you ever did for me had a receipt attached," I said. "Love doesn't break in. Love doesn't forge signatures. Love doesn't wait until Christmas to find out whether a house can be turned into profit." Then Officer Porter told her to turn around. And she did. Slowly. In disbelief. With the expression of a woman who had genuinely expected the universe to recognize who she was and make an exception. When the handcuffs closed on her wrists, the sound was smaller than I expected. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just precise. That's what made it satisfying. Not revenge as chaos. Revenge as accuracy. One by one, they were walked out past the stone columns. Past the broken threshold they had created. Past the witnesses they couldn't charm. Past the iron gates they had drilled and pried and lied their way through. And toward the waiting cruisers at the end of the drive. Logan cried first. My mother kept asking for a private conversation. My father said almost nothing once he realized no one in that house cared anymore how reasonable he looked. June stayed to confirm timelines. Elena stayed to file the paperwork. Harold stayed because he was genuinely furious about the door and the historic preservation implications, and honestly that felt appropriate. By morning, the local story was no longer about a worried family and their troubled, isolated daughter. It was about a planned holiday takeover of a protected home, forged occupancy documents, utility fraud, and a staged public narrative that collapsed the moment it met actual evidence. Logan's pending business partnerships evaporated within the week. Vendors withdrew. His online accounts linked to the fake holiday venture were suspended. My father spent the start of the new year paying attorneys instead of controlling rooms. And my mother, who had built her entire identity around being seen as warm and elegant and impossible to question, had to live in a town that now knew exactly what her tears were worth. That night, after the statements were taken and the cruisers were gone, and a temporary board was nailed over the broken door, I stood alone in the great hall. Christmas tree lit. Fire low. A glass of wine in my hand. And the quiet I had wanted all along, finally returning. I thought about what it costs to be the person in a family who is only remembered when they become useful. The one who spends years making herself smaller, more palatable, more forgiving, because the alternative is being accused of not loving people who don't love you back correctly. I thought about all the Christmases I had driven toward doors that opened like inconveniences. And I thought about how strange it is that the moment you build something beautiful, the people who forgot you for years suddenly have opinions about who it belongs to. Here's what I know now. Some people will call your boundary cruelty because your obedience used to benefit them. Family without respect becomes entitlement. And entitlement grows teeth the moment you build something it cannot control. Protecting yourself from people who keep wounding you is not a betrayal of love. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do, for your future, for your peace, for the version of yourself still brave enough to believe you deserve warmth, is choose yourself before the damage becomes tradition. For the first time in 34 years, Christmas didn't feel like the season I got forgotten. It felt like the season I finally came home. And this time I was the one who owned the door.